Okay, all right. So thank you guys so much for joining. So today we're going to talk all about my favorite topic, and that's how light basically influences our biology, our physiology, and our biochemistry. And I got interested in light because I'm always looking for the root cause of dysfunction. A lot of us focus on things like nutrition or exercise, which are so important. But if we're missing the underlying thing that's impacting how our body reacts to food and exercise, then we're missing the boat. So I'll just pull this running up. And just let me know if you guys can see this. Let's share, start here.
Yes.
Yeah. Share.
Perfect.
Present. All right, so I'll put this in the corner. So we got recording is started. Let me make sure I do this right. I did a whole workshop the other day and I didn't have my screen big. And so the whole time it was just the recording that I shared with all these people was just everyone who was speaking showed up in the middle of the screen so you couldn't see anything. Hopefully this works. All right, so today we're talking about a specific focus on how our light environment and our circadian biology impacts our metabolism and our mitochondrial function. And our mitochondria are basically the little engines in our cell that determine how much energy each cell has. And the energy status of each cell, yes, it impacts, our fatigue and our brain function, but more importantly, it affects what the cell can do. When the energy level in each cell goes down, that's when we start on the path towards dysfunctional cells, and then later on chronic disease. So we're really interested in energy production and especially how our light environment and circadian biology affects that. So I had some Q&As just to see where you guys are at. So I'm just curious, why did you guys join? Or if you feel comfortable maybe thinking about some of these questions, are you specifically focused on metabolism or blood sugar or anything?
Yeah, I'm focused on metabolism and blood sugar. I guess as I've got older, I find it really hard to lose weight and I'm wanting to be able to teach people, better ways of managing their metabolism as they get a bit older. And there feels like there's some sort of missing link.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, the same for me also. I just find that we all have such good intentions to do what's right and what's good, but if you don't have the necessary tools and information to know why you're doing something particular, you could be doing more harm to yourself than actually good, which is, we spoke about fasting, intermittent fasting that, I really like to do, but if I'm not doing it right, it's not actually benefiting me. So, and yeah, being the perimenopause years, things is just getting harder to work through.
Well, the nice thing with when we optimize our light and our circadian biology, no matter what's going on, it'll make everything easier. So the best diet in the world, unless you take care of that part, it's not going to give you the results you wanted. The best intention around fasting or around, your activity levels, if you don't get the sleep and circadian biology part, you're not going to have the effects from it. So that's why I like to kind of start here. So thanks, guys, for sharing. So let's just talk about, when we talk about metabolism and weight and blood sugar and everything, there are, obviously we're going to focus on the big one, the circadian biology and light, but I just want to kind of bring this up that there are other factors. And all of these factors that we don't often talk about, all of these things actually benefit from optimizing our circadian biology. So no matter the kind of the reason why you're having trouble losing weight or, optimizing your metabolism, blood sugar, or energy, just by paying attention to your light environment, all of these things will improve. Things like environmental toxins, things like mold in the environment, having a large load of heavy metals or pesticide residues in the body, that can make people hold on to weight. We like to say that the body's solution to pollution is dilution, and a lot of environmental toxicants, things from like personal care products, cleaning products, these things are fat soluble and they're stored in the fat. Your body is very smart, doesn't want to get rid of them, so it keeps the fat around. Obviously, you know, stress can cause issues with metabolism and weight, and that's through the hormones cortisol, because the body's trying to survive and hold on to, you know, protect us by keeping some body fat around. We're gonna when I talk about light, I always like to consider it as a physiological stress. So even if you're meditating and, you know, you have a really relaxed lifestyle, if you have something like light at night, if you don't sleep in a dark room, that's going to be stressful to your physiology, to your body, and that's going to increase your cortisol and cause issues with weight and blood sugar. Hormones, we'll talk more about them, but especially when it comes to thyroid and this hormone leptin, which is kind of a new kid on the block in terms of hormones. It was only discovered about 15 years ago. Like, we didn't learn much about it in school when I went through. But this is our key hormone, leptin, that controls our body's weight set point. It's produced by the fat cells, and it tells your brain you have enough fat, we don't need to store anymore. And that's very sensitive to circadian biology. We have inflammation and immune reasons. You know, if we're very inflamed, that can cause us to hold on to weight. Our immune system has a circadian rhythm. At night, we make melatonin, which allows our immune system to get rid of viral cells and cancer cells. And the day, when we're exposed to the right kinds of light, especially things like UV on the skin, that improves our immune system. Inflammation. Our gut is so important. Our gut microbiome. Different bacteria will extract different amounts of calories from the same meal. So this is why everyone, all of us have had that friend who's so skinny, but they eat everything and they eat so much. We don't understand. We eat the same amount, we put on weight. That's because different bacteria will extract different amounts of energy from the same food. So our gut health is really important, and our gut circadian rhythm is so important for that. If you've ever traveled, you might realize you might have had the experience where you're bloated or your gut doesn't work as well. So our gut is very sensitive to the light environment. Neurotransmitters, sleep, of course. If we have one night of bad sleep, our blood sugar the next day will be higher. And then mitochondrial function, and that's really intimately tied to circadian rhythm. We'll talk more about that. And then again, kind of hashed on this quite a bit, but I really think circadian biology needs to be at the bottom of the pyramid when we talk about kind of the root cause of dysfunction, because all of these conditions, no matter what's going on, if we help our circadian biology, we're going to improve the outcomes of anything that's going on. I think the biggest problem, this is a shocking study, in our modern life and in terms of our risk of chronic disease, is the amount of time we spend inside. Up until about 150 years ago, we had a primarily outdoor existence. We were in touch with nature. We were outside all the time. We went to bed when it got dark and we got up when it was light. And that's all changed drastically in the last probably just over 100 years since the commercialization of Edison's light bulb. And it's really interesting if we look at epidemiological research, when we see the first spike in, you know, cancer mortality, heart disease, and everything else, we like to think that that was around the time where processed foods became widely available. But if we look at the research, we actually see that that happened before. So we started getting sicker before we had the bad food. So that also is why I focus so much on this idea of light.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so here we go. So everything changed around when we started using artificial light coming inside, because you know, if we think about evolution, we're perfectly adapted to a planet with 24-hour light and dark cycles. It was so important from the single cell organisms we evolved from. Here we go. Basically, adapting to that 24-hour light and dark cycle was a precondition to survival on this planet. So we had to make use of the light during the day, and we had to adapt to the light at night. And we've changed that drastically in the last 150 years. That's been the biggest change to our environment. And frankly, our biology can't keep up. It's such a big shift. We have to also realize that every cell, every second has thousands of different reactions it does. This was a cool little quote from a research paper, that there are more chemical reactions happening in the body in 1 second than there are stars in the galaxy. There's so much going on in our biology, and everything has to be so has to be completely on schedule, otherwise our biology breaks down. So it's just like if you think about if you had like an Amazon warehouse and people showed up late, the deliveries arrived at the wrong time, and we didn't get the orders out on time, there would be absolute chaos. And we have the same thing happen in our body. When our timing mechanism is off, because there's so many things that have to happen on the 24-hour schedule, then the body breaks down. So again, hundreds of different things that happen throughout the day-night cycle, depending on the light environment, depending on our activity, if we've eaten or not, and depending on our genes, which are keeping track of the time. If the signal between what's the light environment, the activity, doesn't match the time our cells think it is, then we have chaos and nothing works well. And ultimately, down that path, we get to chronic disease. Oh, here we go. And then, so we have our circadian timing. So there's this important timing mechanism. Then we need to be able to generate enough energy. And so we generate energy through our mitochondria. Those are little cell engines that we mentioned earlier. We can get energy from our environment. We'll talk more about that. But if we can't make enough energy and our timing mechanism is off, our gene expression is compromised and we ultimately get sick. So back to that idea of circadian biology. We're obviously going to talk a lot about light and timing, but it is important to know, or just to understand, that even if you put, this is a terrible experiment, they've actually done this, keep people in a dark room 24 hours a day, their brain and their cells still are constantly oscillating. So our genetic expression and our body is still going through a 24-hour cycle, even in the absence of light and dark and these different cycles. What is very confusing to the body, what causes a lot of physiological stress, is when the environment doesn't match the time our cells think it should be. And that's when we get big problems. So we need to have that be in sync. Does that all make sense so far?
Yeah.
Yep.
It is so much the missing link in what I've been looking for.
And it's so easy to remedy. And it's really interesting that, when I talk to like supplement companies about doing talks, no one's interested because there's really not a lot of financial incentive. This is just so simple and it's so fundamental and it's so, ultimately could affect the bottom line of, drug companies and people who are selling treatments. Because I really believe if everyone got, like if we had a situation where, our circadian biology was optimized, we wouldn't need all the other, all the other things. So circadian biology, it's like I said, super important. So we have light that comes into the eyes and onto the skin. We have something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, big fancy word. It's just the part of the brain that's really keeping track. We refer to it as the central clock. So that's keeping track of the light that's coming in and syncing that with what time our body thinks it is. And it's deciding if that's a match or a mismatch. So when we have circadian disruption, we're talking about when the light is coming in at the wrong times, when we're doing things like eating in the middle of the night. That's incredibly confusing. And when that breaks down, we see impacts on every single cell, every single organ system, every single part of the body. So I got interested in this whole field because I mentioned before, my specialty was breast cancer. And one of the big things that happens with circadian disruption is we see an increase in many different types of invasive cancers. Our body's ability to surveil against new cancer cells, as well as our immune system's ability to clear and to cope with cancer. So cancer is a big, one of the main areas, especially breast and prostate cancer are really tightly linked to circadian disruption. We have a lot of issues around cardiovascular risk factors, as well as our big one today, metabolism. So when our circadian rhythm breaks down, our body's ability to produce insulin and blood sugar at the right times, that just goes wonky. And when that goes wonky, that affects everything as well. So that we have all these different mechanisms by which simply breaking down our circadian rhythm makes us sick, affecting every every single system in the body. So again, this is just from another paper. You can see these are specific things that have been studied. You know, everything from increasing fat cells, increasing tumors, decreasing our body's ability to deal with blood sugar. And this is important too. You know, we talk about everyone's trying so hard and doing so well to optimize their diet. But again, if we have light at the wrong times, things like our ability to deal with glucose is compromised. We have high blood sugar, even though we're fasting and eating the best meals. We can develop things like fatty liver, even though we're not even eating a poor diet. So super important. So let's bring it back to metabolism. So basically, just to recap, no matter what chronic disease you're interested in, optimizing circadian rhythm is going to be super important. And I'm just going to take you through just a few papers just to show you some of the strength of the research on, especially on metabolism. So when we have circadian disruption, so that's insufficient light during the day, too much light at night, resulting poor sleep. Our body's ability to control blood sugar gets pretty messed up. We have an increased risk of all of our cardiovascular and metabolic diseases, as well as immune system issues that lead to different cancers. So we also see, circadian disruption is very well correlated to obesity. So even when women or people eat the same amount of calories, having light at night will actually cause them to gain more weight. And then, so that's the flip side. So circadian disruption, we talk a lot about blocking light, but it also has to do with not getting enough bright light during the day. So sunlight obviously makes vitamin D, but it's so much more than that. When we get UVA light, that helps us make nitric oxide, improves our blood glucose. We actually have a really nice new study from last year showing that red light, which is the same light that's a natural light, actually 15 minutes of red light before a meal decreased blood sugar responses by 30, I think it was 35%. It's pretty amazing. It's just like, so something as simple as eating your meal outside could decrease your blood sugar, your glycemic response, your blood sugar response after the meal.
Wow.
And this is actually interesting too. So we talked about, I think before you got on, Deb, just about how our eyes are the most sensitive to light, and light in the eyes will disrupt our circadian rhythm the most. But our fat cells, our skin cells, our blood vessels are also sensitive to light. So blue light at night on our skin can make us gain weight, and not enough sunlight on our skin can make us gain weight.
That's why I've moved the school outside.
Yeah, no, I was going outside too, but we're redoing our deck. I don't have a table, so I have to stay inside. Yay, I'm glad. Excellent. And then don't really get into this in this talk, but you know, there's so much fear mongering around the sun, but we need probably a lot more sun than the public narrative may make us believe. And you know, it's estimated that for every one death from melanoma prevented by avoiding the sun, we have 100 people that will die of cardiovascular disease from not getting enough sun. So, you know, we really need to kind of weigh up the pros and the cons of getting enough sun exposure. Of course, we're never saying get sunburned, but we do need probably much more sun on our skin than we're getting. And then back to this idea of mitochondrial function. So again, anytime our mitochondria don't work, anytime they can't produce enough energy, we have an increased risk of chronic disease. Anytime our circadian biology is wonky, increased risk of pretty much all chronic disease. And interestingly, the best thing for our mitochondria is good circadian biology. So they're very closely related. So all of the things that are going to help your circadian biology are going to be good for your mitochondria. And anytime your mitochondria work better, your circadian biology will be better. So there's this kind of interplay between the two. So just, you know, everyone, I think we were so focused in the last 50 years about, you know, genes and, you know, our nuclear genome and how important that is. But we actually now know that our mitochondria, our cells' ability to produce energy, is more important even than the genes we have. So this was a cool experiment. They basically had some normal cells and some tumor cells, and they found that when they took the nucleus, so that would be like the genes that may have caused the cancer from the tumor cell, and put them into a cell with healthy mitochondria, the healthy cells that could produce enough energy, they didn't develop cancer. But when they took a cell that, or when they took a, took the, hold on, no, when they took the mitochondria, so the low energy producing cell, and put them into a cell with the genes that cause cancer, they didn't actually produce cancer cells. And this is also just, I don't know if you can see this that well, but also showing again that when our mitochondria don't work as well, then we have trouble with blood sugar. So we don't use our glucose as well. We make more oxidative stress, and we don't produce enough energy. And we get fatter. So our mitochondria, they make energy, but they're also, and this is how they kind of tie together, they're also sensors of light. So they're very sensitive to light. So even though we think, you know, when we're outside exposed to light, it's only hitting our skin, it's actually different types of light penetrate different depth into the body. So like when we're outside and there's UVB lights make vitamin D, that only penetrates just slightly under the skin. But the infrared light, the light that's around all the time from sunrise to sunset that we can't see, that infrared light can penetrate up to 10 centimeters and go through the skull, and it interacts with our mitochondria and makes them work better. So just in terms of circadian biology, this is always interesting. Have you ever had any experience where either you stayed up really late or had a big trip, traveled somewhere, and that's affected your energy or obviously sleep, but any symptoms you were having?
I don't think I've noticed it to the point where I thought it's a problem, which is actually quite sad.
Oh, it's not good. You have strong mitochondrial function then.
Now, I just think, even though I didn't know whether it was related to that.
Interesting.
Mm.
And one thing, like I work with a lot of people with autoimmune conditions. And one thing that's, we see quite often is when they travel, especially across time zones, and if we run their antibodies too close to their trip, invariably, no matter how good they've been with their diet or their supplements, well, always, or not always, but we often see this a spike in their autoimmune activity just because of the time zone differences and the circadian disruption. Oh, we already talked about this. But just so we're on the same wavelength, and I'll probably wavelength, and I'll probably put this slide earlier on in the presentation for next time. But I think we mentioned before, when we talk about light, we're talking really about three things. We're talking about UV light. So how it works, this is the electromagnetic spectrum. So this is kind of the energy in our environment. So if we start at the one side, we have X-rays and gamma rays, which have a lot of energy, and they're very short wavelength. Then we get to UV, and then we have visible light. That's the light that we can see. And then we have infrared light, which are very low energy, but very long wavelengths. So they go really deep into the body. They can travel really far. In the morning, we tend to have a little bit of visible light and infrared light. The infrared light is, again, it's this longer wavelength. It's very anti-inflammatory to the body, and it increases something called intracellular melatonin, which is super important as an antioxidant and protects our cells. So the visible infrared in the morning, then about an hour, 90 minutes later, we get to a little bit of UV. And then the midday, we have that UVB, UVA, we have all of the light around, that's when it's the brightest, we have all the spectrums. And then throughout the day, as the day gets later, we lose the UVA, UV again, and go back to visible and infrared. And if you notice, throughout the 24 hours, we have this pattern where it goes visible infrared, UV, back to visible infrared. And so your body's really sensitive to that. So anytime we get outside in the morning or in the afternoon, we have that contrast with just visible infrared, no UV. And that's a signal to wake up or go to bed. So when we talk about getting light throughout the day, most important times I would say is first thing in the morning, get a little bit of sun during the day, and then if you can, get a little bit of late afternoon or light around sunset. And just having those three kind of time stamps, that'll kind of get your body kind of back into that rhythm. And then I also like to think about, we talk about light as just, one thing, but I always like to think about light as nutrition as well, because it's not just vitamin D. We make a lot of different things from different types of light, and they're all really important. And a lack of sunlight is associated with many chronic diseases, but also just all-cause mortality. So the less light and the less sunlight people get, actually, the more they die of everything. And we talked a little bit about this already, but I want to focus more on the skin part. So we sense light, obviously it comes into our eyes, and that tells our brain where we are in the 24-hour cycle. That needs to be synced with all the clocks in our cells so that there's a match between what time our body thinks it is and the light that's coming in. But really importantly as well, our skin, sometimes we think of just skin as just like a covering, but our skin in kind of research and the way we think of skin now, we call it a neuroendocrine organ, meaning that on its own, on exposure to different types of light, it can make neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, different things that affect our brain function, and can make hormones all by itself. So the type of light coming onto our skin will affect all kinds of chemistry in the body. It's also really important, just like we need the clocks in our cells to match up with the light in our eyes, we need the light in our eyes to match up with the signal that's coming onto our skin. I'm not sure if you were there, Debbie, when I was talking about how sunglasses are very likely related to increase in skin cancer. But it's because we need that match of the signal coming into our eyes to make the chemistry in our skin to protect us from UV light. So perfect world, when you go out for your walk in the morning, definitely don't have sunglasses on, don't have anything covering your eyes, but even better, try to wear shorts or, at least let some skin be exposed to the light as well.
So does that mean like for midday sun, you should be wearing sunglasses or?
No, you don't want to wear sunglasses. You can wear a hat.
Okay.
If you're skiing or driving a boat or driving a car and there's it's dangerous, then definitely sunglasses. But if you're going outside to optimize the body's function, your metabolism, the hormones, you want to let your skin be exposed and have your eyes just be sensing the natural light as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of because I have these like fatty deposits on my eye, on the white part of my eye, and the optometrist said that it's sun damage.
Interesting.
So very interesting. So it's like, do I wear sunglasses? Don't I wear sunglasses? Like, or is it just the time of day? Like it's now almost midday now, and I'm sitting outside now. So is this okay to be outside like this? Is always the UV too strong? Because obviously I'm also darker skinned, so there's a lot of conflicting information. It's like, oh, the sun is so bad, you know. Certain times of the day you shouldn't be really out in the sun. So it's like it's a very controversial topic with a lot of people, I would say.
So for you, Deb, since you have more melanin, you're just naturally a bit darker. You actually need more sun than other people who would have lighter skin. So the amount of sun that you need to make vitamin D and be healthy is going to be a bit more because you probably just because of your genetics and background.
Yep.
Lighter skin people. With the sunglasses, so the best thing to do, so the very best way to protect ourselves against strong sun in the middle of the day is get that morning light. Because in the morning, that infrared I keep talking about, that's the light that basically sets the body up to deal with the stronger light. Throughout our whole evolution, it was always the pattern of infrared, get ready, bright light, okay, that causes some damage, infrared again heals. So we always had that infrared healing, get ready, bright light, okay, it does cause some damage, but it is important healing. So it's when we don't get the full spectrum, when we just go
Yep.
outside in the middle of the day, then that can get dangerous to our skin and eyes because we haven't
Okay.
prepared the body properly or primed the body.
Properly. Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
But obviously, I mean, don't stare at the sun. You know, if you're out, I
Of
would,
course, yeah. Mm-hmm.
if you're concerned, I would wear a hat, much better than sunglasses.
Okay, thank you.
This is getting a bit complicated, but this is just showing you that, or just kind of continue on this conversation of how we sense light. So we sense it, but light actually interacts with different parts of our body, different parts of our biochemistry. It interacts with different proteins and amino acids. When the light hits these, they change. So the morning light, when we're exposed to that, our tyrosine gets made into thyroid hormone, or gets made into precursors to melanin to make our brown pigment to make us darker. We have this gene called POMC, pro-opioid melanocortin, and then we have steroid hormones. So on exposure to different light, these steroid we have changes in chemistry. So we have a cholesterol that gets made into vitamin D when it's exposed to different light. Cholesterol is made into pregnenolone, which is our parent hormone to all of our sex hormones, but it needs the light signal to make the chemistry change. Won't get into too many details, but one of the most important ways that our body senses and reacts to light is through this gene. It's called POMC. And on exposure to light, it gets broken down into these, they're called peptides, but they're basically like messengers in the body. So the bright light makes ACTH, which tells us, wake up, let's make some cortisol. Let's get going in the morning, let's have some energy. It gets broken down to alpha MSH, which is the thing that allows your body to cope with the sun. So melanocyte stimulating hormone is what makes you begin to make some brown pigment so you don't get sunburned. But it's also really important in appetite and energy balance. So when we have issues, when we don't get morning light, we don't make alpha MSH, and we tend to be hungrier. So that's kind of how that ties in. The light will also, depending on the type of light, will make different peptides. And the blue light without the UV will make a lot of this guy over here, which is called CLIP. And that's almost like insulin. So that can increase our blood sugar and cause us to potentially gain weight in the absence of food if we get that blue stimulation. There's UV light also makes beta lipotrophin. Lipotrophin means breaks up fat. So this is really important for appetite as well, and the amount of fat we have. Again, getting into details, but this POMC, this is in the skin and in the eyes. And that's why we need that signal between the skin and the eyes having the same light. Light is also, I call it the conductor of the hormonal orchestra. Different light signals at different recipes of light will make different hormones basically come out. So we know from animals, if you've ever had chickens, you know that when the light, or other animals, you'll know that when the light is less, they tend to produce less eggs and their fertility decreases. And that's because light is a big driver of our hormones. So sunrise, get our thyroid hormone going. We make neurotransmitters, wakes up our circadian biology. We start to make that POMC, which makes the alpha melanocyte, which helps us to be protected against UV. Midday sun, it will also increase our cortisol and insulin because we need to be moving around in the day. And then sunset, really interesting. If we can get outside in the evening, it could, there's quite a bit, there's some research that shows that could actually protect us against artificial light. So I think, Fran, you were asking if you have to use a computer at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Use flux, use the blue blockers, but see the sunset.
Yeah. How much time do you need at these 3 different times? Is it like an optimum amount?
I mean, the more the better, but I'd say at least 10 minutes if you can.
Yeah. Okay.
They say for circadian disruption, so say if you wake up in the middle of the night and you look at your phone, it takes 30 seconds to 2 minutes to really mess up your melatonin. So it is pretty quick, but it's, just going outside for 5 seconds, probably not as good, but even just a few minutes should be beneficial. But, if you could aim for 10, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And then I keep mentioning this thing about infrared light. And why that's so important is we said that our mitochondria are cell engines um, that make energy are really sensitive to light, and they're most sensitive to infrared light. So when we have infrared light, they turn on and make more energy, even if there's not more food calories coming in. And the infrared light also balances our blood sugar because through the mitochondria working better, the blood sugar is used up and uses energy versus stored as fat. So really important. Getting just that. And the infrared light, this is why, I don't know if you guys come across, everyone's into like the red light panels and red light therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was another question I was going to ask you about, though.
Hmm. I
You
mean,
know, are they, sorry.
go ahead.
So if you're managing to get outside enough, is that sufficient, or do you need to add red light panels in as well?
So about 50% of sunlight is always red light. I mean, you can't see
Yeah.
it. So outside is basically free red light.
Yeah.
If you're working all day inside, you can't open the window because the issue is the glass blocks the red light. Then you could get a red light and just have it in the room because that'll balance out the artificial light from the screens and the overhead lights.
And I noticed in the evenings you had a photo of your Instagram. Everything was red. So do you have red lighting at night? How do you do that?
Pretty easy. I mean, you can get the Miter 10 or Bunnings. We talked about this with Debbie. They
Yep.
sometimes sell the red light bulbs. They're just like LED bulbs that have a red paint on them.
Yeah.
But you can get, there's a website called blockbluelight.nz, and they sell different lights that don't have the blue spectrum, so they're much better. But I mean, even better, candles are great. Candles are not disruptive. Candles have a lot of infrared. So infrared is also the heat. So when you go outside and it's warm, that's infrared light.
Yeah.
And so firelight, candlelight is actually quite good. Yeah, that's super important. But the other benefit of the red light is it increases healing, increases energy, but what it does when it penetrates in and kind of floods our mitochondria, it increases something called mitophagy, which is the recycling. So a lot of people fast because they want to get into autophagy or mitophagy, renewal of the body. But just by getting natural light, or I mean, if you want to, you could use a red light panel. That's going to improve the mitochondrial efficiency in your energy production. And basically, no matter what's going on, it's going to help with your health. One more thing about near infrared. The cool thing about near infrared is you don't have to be naked. So it'll penetrate your clothes. So you can go for a walk and you'll still get some versus the UV, you need it to be touching your skin. So then back to metabolism. This hormone leptin, this is a really interesting hormone because again, what it does is it's made in the fat cells and the gut, and it talks to the brain and tells your brain your metabolic set point, but also your fat set point. So it controls how much fat your body stores. And it's really sensitive to circadian disruption. It controls your appetite as well as your energy expenditure. So that's why, I don't know if you've ever had the experience, you don't sleep that well and you just want to snack all day. I've had that. And it's really interesting too, when people talk about insulin resistance, by the time you're insulin resistant, for the most part, people have been leptin resistant for quite a long time. Leptin is also super important for reproductive hormones. It basically, it's the signal to say we have enough fat and we're healthy enough to reproduce. So if your leptin is messed up because your circadian rhythm is messed up, it's also a big driver of infertility. So if you're working with clients or if yourself or know anyone who has issues with fertility, leptin is often an issue there. And now let's talk about how to optimize or how to help leptin in our circadian biology. And in terms of taking all that information I just rambled at you for the last half an hour, what do we actually do with that? So me and Deb have had this conversation. I love fasting, a big fan, but I really like this idea of early time restricted eating because light is a signal for circadian biology, turning it on to wake up, stop eating, turn off. Food timing is also important. So when we wake up, we get light, we move around, we, in a perfect world, we eat some food. All of that strengthens the circadian biology, the signals, because it's a match, it's a wake up signal. And I think a lot of people get into trouble because it's easier not to eat in the morning and just start eating at 12 or 1 o'clock and eating until 8 or 9 and then fasting. But that's actually quite out of line with our circadian biology. And often, especially for women, that can cause some issues with cortisol, our stress hormone, as well as thyroid function. And because if we don't eat in the morning, that leptin signaling gets confused. If we have a nice big breakfast, then we're basically giving the body the signal, we're a new day, we're waking up, we're nourished, we can have optimal metabolism. Let's see. So in terms of how I recommend this, there's a really cool app, it's called Circadian. And I think I told that to Debbie already, but Fran, you can check that out. And you put your GPS location in, and it'll basically tell you when sunrise is, when sunset is, when the UVA is coming out. You can kind of use that to kind of gauge and kind of shape your lifestyle. So this is perfect world. This is not, you don't have to do everything. But if I was helping someone with metabolism, blood sugar in a circadian supportive fashion, my recommendations would be to, wake up maybe slightly before the sunrise, get your morning light, then try to have a meal within an hour of waking up. And for that first meal, you want to focus on having enough protein and fats especially. And then you're giving your body the signal, we're very safe, there's no stress, our circadian rhythm is optimized, and we're well nourished. Perfect world as well. We want to, if we can, I struggle with this, I'm just at 60 minutes, but we want to also delay our caffeine a little bit, because when we wake up, naturally our cortisol is rising. Our cortisol is our stress hormone. Our cortisol is rising, we haven't eaten, we throw in the caffeine, it's actually quite a stress on the body. And over time, that can impact things like thyroid function, because our thyroid hormones and our cortisol are very closely related. And when cortisol is too high for too long, that can turn your thyroid off. So then what I would usually recommend is, depending on, if you're trying to lose weight, or if you have diabetes, or if you just want to be healthy, anywhere from a kind of a 6 to a 12-hour eating window. 12 hours for me is kind of the max. And that's because our gut, all the cells, the enterocytes, and all the cells in our gut that turn over and recycle every night, they really need an empty gut to repair themselves. So if we don't have at least 12 hours from our last meal to our next breakfast, we don't get the proper repair of our gut, because there's just still food around and we're still kind of digesting. So this might look like you can have breakfast at 6:30, stop eating latest by 6:30 in the evening. You want to really give your body, 2 to 3 hours before bed. Again, that's going to help your sleep and your evening circadian rhythm. If at the end of the day you start to block blue light, you maybe see the sunset, then you don't have too much artificial light, your melatonin will rise. That's going to help your immune system and your metabolism, especially then if you're going to bed without having food in your stomach. Ideally, perfect world, red light decreases blood sugar, so have your meals outside or near an open window. If you can't do that, at least try not to look at your laptops or screens, because the blue light from the screens is going to spike your blood sugar no matter what you're eating. If you need to be distracted, and this is for me because I'm so bad at being mindful eating, just read a book or a magazine. Again, perfect world, 3 to 4 hours between meals. For leptin signaling, snacking is not ideal. You really want to eat, allow your blood sugar to come back down, and then eat again. And then obviously block artificial light at night, and with a focus on the seasonal and local foods. And we'll talk about why that's so important next. Oh, and this is just from a new paper. So a lot of people, a lot of my clients and me myself like to follow kind of a high fat, kind of more of a ketogenic diet. And it's really important too that we now know that if your circadian mechanism isn't working right, if you don't have good circadian biology, if you don't see morning light, you can't actually burn fat as fuel. So then you get into trouble of now you're eating a high fat diet, but you're not being able to use it. You're not burning that fat. So you really need the morning light to be able to benefit, especially from a keto or like a carnivore type diet. And then I guess we already kind of talked about this, but perfect world, when you want to get outside, get that morning light. You want to get a little, if possible, UVA rise, especially if you have issues with mood. That's really the feel-good time. Just that early morning sun, it's a little bit warm. I call it nature's Prozac. Midday, you make your vitamin D. You make nitric oxide when the UVA and UVB hits your skin. Nitric oxide lowers your blood pressure, improves your cardiovascular function, helps your metabolism. Sunset could protect you from light at night. And that infrared light is always there. And then we already talked about no sunglasses, contacts, get some skin in the sun if you can. Of course, caveats, if you're on the beach all day, then, wear long sleeves, cover up, and just, don't get sunburned. And then everyone always asks me, actually, before we go on, any questions?
No, thank you.
No.
I realize don't want to keep you guys too long. So everyone always asks me, okay, what kind of diet do you recommend? Like, are you vegan? And I was a vegan and now I'm kind of keto, eat everything. But my biggest thing now is when people ask me what to eat, I want to know where they live, what kind of light they're exposed to. And that's because this idea of seasonal cycles, we have our circadian biology, which is our 24-hour rhythms, but we also have seasonal rhythms. So the way the body will react to different foods is different during different times of the year because the light environment is different. So if you've ever noticed, in the winter, there's not a lot of fruit around. In the winter, our blood sugar sensitivity, our ability to cope with a lot of sugar is less. If you have your HbA1c and you're eating the same diet all year, drawn in the winter, it'll probably be a bit higher than in the summer. So it's really important to sync what our body's natural responses based on our light environment to the food that's in our light environment. When we do that, that's an easy way to be healthy. Same thing with our microbiome. So just like, the trees are changing all year, maybe not as much in New Zealand, but there's seasonal cycles, our microbiome changes. And so in the winter, we tend to have less diversity and we have more of those bacteria that take more calories out of the same meal. So versus in the summer where we have more diversity and we don't absorb as many or we don't extract as much energy. So if we're eating high energy foods all year because we can go to, I don't know, New World and they still sell bananas and everything all year, then we create another mismatch that causes, that just naturally going to impact our metabolism and mitochondrial function. So now it gets interesting. Stay with me. Food is nutrition, of course. Food is the building blocks for our body, but food is also information. All food on this planet at some point, I'm just trying to think of someone like the most processed food, at some point it was made from photosynthesis. So all the food, the plants were grown under the sun and the animals ate them. So they all come from photosynthesis. The light that the food is grown under encodes the food with a certain, almost like a barcode or a blueprint, that when we eat that food, our mitochondria, those little cell engines, are decoding. And when the information in the food doesn't match the information that's coming in the eyes and coming onto the skin, then there's confusion in the body. Anytime we have confusion, the same with the circadian disruption, when we cause confusion in the body, that over time leads to poor health.
So twisties really must be very confusing.
Very confusing. It's also because so natural food has this. Okay, let's get. I'm going to explain this really simply. Natural food has a different blueprint of types of hydrogen, and we're going to talk more about that. And the environment is always kind of creating that the type of hydrogen blueprint that's in the food. When we make food in a lab or in a make processed food, we lose that blueprint, and then the body's really confused, like, where the hell did this come from? This looks really weird. So the amount of sunlight and where the food was grown is going to encode the food with that information that your mitochondria, that your body is going to then uncouple and understand. And that's because the strength of the light will cause, we don't need to get into the biophysics of it, but cause different excitations in the electrons in the food. So to try to put that simply without trying to explain the physics that I probably don't even understand that well, is I think of food as an electromagnetic barcode. And so we have non-seasonal or non-local food. We're eating things that are shipped in or things that are, bananas in the middle of winter. When it's not a match, this is biologically impossible. Like all through evolution, we would have never had this situation. And when this occurs, in physics, there's less coherence and there's more chaos. And in biology, we call that more inflammation. So just by eating non-seasonal and local foods, we're confusing the body, upsetting our mitochondria, and potentially increasing just inflammation. So is this the talk that you watched? The Food is Light talk, friend?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
No.
So this is some of these slides, they were for the Health Masters Clinicians talk. So stay with me and ask lots of questions. But basically, if we simplify it, so the way we extract energy from food is a process of, it's called glycolysis, and then the citric acid cycle and energy transport, which happens in the mitochondria. So this is outside and this in the cell, and this goes into the mitochondria. And basically what our body does is it does all these little complex chemical reactions to move electrons around. And electrons are present in all of our food. They're moved around, and then the body creates this gradient between putting electrons on one side and then putting the hydrogens on the other side. And as it passes them through, it turns a little motor and we produce chemical energy, which is called ATP. Oh, here we go, better picture. So basically, we get food, we break it down, and inside the mitochondria itself, we're moving electrons around, and that moving that electrons is just moving the energy around. And then it's creating this gradient of hydrogen, and the hydrogens come back through, and so this is why we call it the mitochondria, the engines of the cell. We have this little thing called ATP synthase, and this is actually a tiny microscopic little motor, and it turns super fast. It turns at 9,000 revolutions per minute. So that's like crazier than the fastest Ferrari engine. And we have hundreds of these in each cell that are creating energy. So they're spinning and creating energy, and they're creating energy through these hydrogens that come through. So the mitochondria puts the hydrogens on one side, lets them flow through, and as they flow through, that creates the cell energy, or the ATP. Now, there's actually two types of hydrogen found in nature, and these are called isotopes. And I'm sorry to have to bring you back to high school chemistry, but isotopes are basically the same element with usually a different mass, so different weight. So in nature, we have hydrogen, and that's what spins our cell engines and makes our mitochondria work and produce lots of energy. And then we have something called deuterium, which is a hydrogen, but it's double the size. So it's a really big fat hydrogen. And basically the amount of sunlight and where the food is grown will determine how much hydrogen versus deuterium is in the food and where in the food molecules are located. And that's the other way the body kind of keeps track of where this food came from. These heavy hydrogens, the deuteriums, They're naturally present, and if you start Googling and reading about them, there's a lot of link between having too much deuterium and cancer and different issues that impact the mitochondria. But in naturally grown food, this is gonna be regulated by the amount of sunlight. Typically, deuterium, that heavy hydrogen, is going to be the highest in fruits and veggies that grow fast, that have a lot of sugar, and much lower in lowest in fats. So it goes carbohydrates, then proteins and fats. So fats are going to be the lowest in deuterium, and especially fruits are going to be the highest. And if you've never heard of deuterium before, like I said, you can read a lot about how deuterium causes mitochondrial dysfunction. But it's not to say that carbohydrates and fruit are bad. It's just to say that if we eat them all year, and if we're in the wrong light environment, this can cause trouble. So basically, we had that little engine that spins, the hydrogens come through and produce energy. The deuterium, because they're double the size, it's like if you imagine, going to a theme park or I don't know, like the movies, and they have a little turnstile, and everyone goes through the turnstile. All of a sudden you have someone who's 200 kilos and they can't fit through the turnstile. So if we have too many of these deuterium because we're eating non-seasonally and eating too many carbohydrates or processed foods, which have the most deuterium, then that's going to clog up the little cell engine. It's going to kind of block the turnstile, and the mitochondria can't produce energy like they normally would. So again, that deuterium, it is present in sweet things, it's present in vegetable, or mostly in fruit. And it's not a problem because when we have strong light, we actually get rid of deuterium quite easily. The problem is if we're having these high deuterium, high carbohydrate foods all year, then they can damage the mitochondria.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
about the deuterium? Because I had read somewhere that things like protein powders are really high in deuterium. So obviously if you're getting enough sunlight and it's a less processed protein powder, is it okay or not?
So if we're getting a lot of sunlight, deuterium isn't bad and isn't just a bad thing. It's bad when it gets into the mitochondria.
Yeah.
Deuterium is sequestered into our bones, into our collagen especially, because deuterium, because it's very heavy, when it's compressed, it's piezoelectric. So when you push on it, it produces energy, which is really good because that gives us, that springiness in our bones and ligaments. The biggest problem with deuterium and protein powders are actually in the collagen supplements, because collagen is where the body will naturally sequester deuterium to keep it out of the mitochondria. If we're using, all the collagen protein powders, we can get a pretty high load. And if we're not exposed to the right light environment, then we can't sequester that deuterium in the right place.
Yeah.
But yeah, but also the more processing, the more deuterium, because in the labs, they don't have a checks and balance when they do hydrogenation reactions, and they don't have that natural check and balance to keep the deuterium out and put the hydrogen in. But gosh, so again, the more sunlight we get, especially the more infrared light, the more we're able to keep that deuterium out of the mitochondria. So that's why, I've no problem with people eating, super high carbohydrate diet. If you're in Costa Rica, if you're in Bali, you're exposed to that strong light, you're outside all day with that infrared, you can eat all the fruit you like because it's not going to be a problem. The problem is when you live an indoor existence and you're sitting at the computer all day and it's winter, and then you have all the sweet fruits and the grains and the carbohydrates. Back to Sue's signal. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to get so into the weeds in this presentation. But basically, again, deuterium is a signal for your body that it's summer, that there's a lot of light, that things are growing fast, and it's fine if you're in that environment, but not so much if you're in a different environment. Yeah, so the bottom line the ratio of deuterium and hydrogen and where it is in the carbohydrate molecules or in the protein molecules, it's a signal to tell the body where the food is from. Processed foods, like you said, things like protein powders, anything packaged, they're going to have a lot of deuterium because there's no natural checks and balances. And then whenever we have excess, when we can't sequester it, when it gets into that mitochondria, it can get into those little cell engines, cause them to stutter and not be able to produce energy. And anything that reduces the energy production of a cell eventually can lead to dysfunction, which can lead to chronic disease. And the biggest one for us, when energy production in the mitochondria is compromised, then our metabolism doesn't work as well. Our glucose stays higher. We can't burn fats as fuel. And that sets the stage for chronic disease. That's also why we say that a low carb diet could be kind of safer for people. You know, if you have mitochondrial disease, if you live a primarily indoor existence, just by eating more high fat, you're going to get less total deuterium, so you don't have to worry as much of how to deplete it. Sweating also depletes deuterium. So when we're in hot climates, eating the fruit, we're usually outside and sweating more, where we'd naturally get rid of it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Sorry, I shouldn't have left all these slides in for my clinical presentations for you guys. But some more things about why seasonal diet is so good. Again, circadian biology, then we have circannual biology. The more sun there is, the more folate there is. There's more foliage. When the sun's out, plants grow more. Strong UV light tends to deplete our folate levels. So when the sun is stronger, we should eat more of the plants around, and that'll offset that. When the light is strong, we also have more polyphenols. So polyphenols are all the colorful pigments in fruits and veggies that basically protect the plant from strong UV light. And we have lots of evidence. So when we eat those polyphenols, it protects our skin and protects our eyes from the UV light. This is just a little paper just to show that eating the same food in a different season will have a different effect on your blood sugar and metabolism. So they're looking at sweet cherries. If you ate them locally, then you had less of a blood sugar response than eating the ones that were non-local, non-seasonal. Skip that one. And then again, just the same idea about how the different foods in our environment will program our circannual biology, so our body to regulate our blood sugar throughout the year, just as the light controls our circadian biology. And then when we eat the plants that are present in our environment, especially the ones, you know, in the summer, we'll have more fruit, all the berries, all those colorful fruits and veggies. They protect our skin from sunlight as well, and eyes as well. I'm a big fan of cruciferous vegetables, so that's why I grow a lot of microgreens. And one of the benefits of our cruciferous veggies is they also protect our skin from UV radiation. There's polyphenols again. And then just to recap as well, so when we have stronger light, there's more carbohydrates, and we're able to tolerate more carbohydrates better. So this creates this nice match. When the stronger light, again, better glucose control. When we're outside more, we get more infrared light, which lowers our blood sugar. And generally throughout the year this is in the US, but in the winter months, just naturally our glycemic control, our ability to deal with carbohydrates goes down. And then DHA, this is a really good one for Deb, especially with any problem with your eyes. DHA is really important in protecting the eyes and the brain, as well as the skin from strong UV light. It's quite cool. DHA is a very interesting molecule in terms of the quantum physics of how it works. When DHA is exposed to light, it can actually increase basically help with creating electricity that can be transmitted through the nervous system and kind of give your body that extra little bit of energy. Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, some more seafood for protecting your eyes from the sun. And obviously, seasonal local, it's going to be fresh. You lose so many nutrients when stuff is in the grocery store for 2 weeks. There's some strategies. Obviously, you can grow your own food. Farmers markets are great. And then getting that match between the food you're eating and your environment is so important. So this is just really interesting. I'm sorry, I don't want to take too long. We have 5 more minutes, but this is super interesting. So we think of energy as food. We think, oh, we eat food, we have energy. But there's actually other sources of free energy. When we talk about energy, or when I talk about energy, I'm talking about the amount of electrons that are present that are able to drive that electron transport chain, that little, make those little mitochondria work. And of course, we think of food as the primary, but in a lot of the literature, the historical literature on like the biophysics that underlie energy production, there's actually this thought that probably it's only about 1/3 of the electrons for energy come from food, and that we get a lot of energy actually from our environment. And the two main ones being connected to the earth directly, and the other one is directly through light, which is quite cool. So this is what I'm so excited about and why I just got back from Samoa. Well, I'm going again in 2 weeks. So we have melanin. Melanin, a lot of people just think it's just for your tan, it makes you brown. But melanin is actually a really, really interesting compound. It's made from tyrosine and dopamine. And of course, when it's produced in the skin, it creates like a little umbrella that protects the DNA underneath and the cells underneath from being damaged from the UV light. But it does also a lot of other things. It protects against loss of folate. So when we're in the sun too long, it can break down our folic acid. It can also potentially be resynthesized to make thyroid hormone and L-dopamine. And that's kind of interesting. But why I think it's really interesting is we now know that they're using a lot of biosynthetic melanin to make solar panels, because when UV light hits melanin in the presence of water, it splits the water apart. So we have hydrogen, oxygen, and free electrons. And free electrons are, again, a source of energy. A couple more things about melanin I think are so cool. They're also, a lot of people are concerned with mercury and heavy metals, but we now know that melanin has the ability to chelate, to stick onto heavy metals and allow them to be shed through the skin when our skin cells get sloughed off. It's why in cities and animals that are in polluted environments, they're often darker colored. So if you look at pigeons in a really polluted city, they have more melanin, they're more the dark colored ones. Versus if they have less environmental stress, they often have less melanin, so they're more of the lighter colored pigeons and birds. Melanin also, this is cool. It absorbs UV light, but it absorbs most of the electromagnetic spectrum. So I don't know if you remember that picture at the beginning where we had all the light and the colors. But melanin will also absorb things like 5G radiation, 4G radiation. So being darker potentially, or producing more melanin because you spend more time outside, could be, as we continue to increase the amount of non-native electromagnetic radiation in our environment, could be highly protective. That's my cheeky photo. But this is just some research again to show that melanin, because it has that ability to split the electrons out of water on exposure to UV light, gives the energy. And this is where they first kind of figured it out. It was in these turtles. These turtles would hibernate for, I think, 2 or 3 months, and they would have very low levels of oxygen and basically no input coming in, and they were able to survive. And they were using the melanin in their shells to produce oxygen because they were underwater, and also to produce energy to survive. But just like plants that use chlorophyll to make energy, we're finding out that we humans can use our melanin to also create energy. And then the other big one that a lot of people think is a little bit hokey, but this idea of earthing, being connected directly to the earth, is so well researched and such a great free way to support your energy and mitochondrial function. So we have our Earth, and every minute there's hundreds and hundreds of lightning strikes. And so the Earth itself is being charged up by lightning. Most of the lightning happens around the equator, but the Earth is absorbing all that energy. And when we connect to the Earth, when we are barefoot or even just leaning against a tree or sitting in the grass, we can actually absorb those electrons. And those electrons can help with our energy production. They help our mitochondrial function. And it's also quite a bit of research showing that being connected to the earth is fantastic for inflammation. So we decrease our inflammation, our blood becomes less sticky, our immune system works better just by being outside and connected to the earth.
Can I ask you a question about water?
Yeah.
So I've been putting a jug of water outside for the sunlight, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that, beneficial, or I can't filter it, so I thought maybe that was my best next option.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's beneficial, definitely, because again, you're getting that signal from the light into your water. We know water has the ability to have, on some level, memory. So you're basically structuring the water just by putting it outside and giving it a coherent, natural signal versus, straight from the tap. So I definitely think that's beneficial.
Especially when the cat drinks from it as well.
Yeah, exactly. So finally made it. So the bottom lines, I told you, I was kind of sharing a lot of papers and the science behind it. But and that's really interesting. But the bottom line is a lot of what we can do for our health is free, and it's so accessible and it's so basic. The more we can reconnect with nature, the healthier our mitochondrial function and the easier it is to have, optimal metabolism. And the more disconnected we are, then the more problems we're going to get into, the more we're going to need supplements, the more we're going to need medications, the more, eventually we're going to get sick. And then bottom line, I think the takeaways here are, optimize natural light as much as you can. I think we're all pretty deficient in it. Block light at night. We have way too much artificial light. Good circadian biology. This is key too. Try as much as possible to wake up and go to bed at the same time, especially on the weekend. Like a lot of people, they go to bed at 9 o'clock during the week and then stay up till 12 on the weekend. You're better off finding a time in the middle that you can adhere to. So instead of going to bed at 9 and then staying up till 12, going to bed at 10 o'clock every night, even though it's a bit later, would be better for your circadian biology. And then this idea of seasonal and local food. I mean, I gave you two kind of mechanisms, or a couple different mechanisms by which it's so important. But we need that match between our environment, the signals coming in, the information in the food for our mitochondria to be healthy. And then go outside. Yeah, so I think we made it through. Thank you guys for listening.
That was outstanding. Thank you so much. That is honestly just incredible. I can just see so much of it connecting.
I know. I mean, my biggest kind of joy and passion is, there's a lot of things that are just intuitive. Like, when you pick a tomato from your garden, it's better than buying something from the grocery store. Like, we know that when we wake up early and we see the pink sunrise, it makes us feel good. We know when we take our shoes off and go to the beach, it's, we feel happier. It's just like, I'm the one who just has to give the science so it doesn't sound so kooky and hippie.
Oh no, but it's so important. And I think so many people are disconnected, and so they don't think about these sort of things.
Absolutely.
And when you go back and it is more intuitive, it does make such a difference. So thank you.
No problem. No, thank you so much for sticking around again. Next time, I think I'll refine the presentation. Probably didn't need to have all the clinical slides and confuse you guys about the deuterium, but
No, that's really important. You often want that in there because you might want to go back and look at some of that later. And then you're going to have people challenging you so much on things. It's nice to be able to flick them back.